When we think about scenes, we usually list the usual ones: anger, pride, envy. But this octopus shows us a more complicated kind of scene, a behavior that slips under the radar in daily life, and little by little prevents people from really connecting. In Takopi's original scene, we meet Takopi, an alien from the Hapian race who comes to Earth with a purpose that will push him into experiences beyond his understanding and his expectations, to bring joy to the corners of the galaxy. On this planet, Takopi meets Shizuka Kyuse, a 9-year-old girl who, unlike most people, doesn't react indifferently to the alien. On the contrary, she shows him kindness, offering him food, and creating a friendship that is strange, yet meaningful. Right from their first conversation, you can see Takopi's personality. Even though he's from another world, he's childish, innocent, and above all ignorant about how Earth and humans work. So this ignorance, what I call false resilience, stops him from forming a deep connection with Shizuka and the others, because he lacks empathy. This makes him come up with strange hypotheses like that humans can fly, but that he can bring happiness with certain instruments. Since on his planet those instruments work, he naively thinks they will work on Earth too. But then, days after Takopi met Shizuka, everything changes. Shizuka turns up badly hurt and broken inside, holding the collar of her dog, Chappie. Takopi doesn't understand what happened, but still tries to fix the situation by giving her another device, the reconciliation ribbon, the only tool she's shown interest in. He hesitates to give it to her, but in the end agrees, thinking, what's the worst that could... He's stunned. His instrument, which aims to create connection, was used to cause death. So what does he do next? Yes, you can probably guess. Without long talk, he uses another device, the Happy Camera, a tool that returns him into the exact moment a photo was taken. This is the moment where Takopi's systematization begins, starting with Shizuka. Immanuel Kant will read Takopi's behavior as paternalistic. He stops seeing Shizuka as an autonomous being capable of making her own choices, and instead treats her as a means to achieve his own purpose, bringing joy to the world. So he decides to go with Shizuka to school to find out what led to her tragic fate. There he meets Marina Kirarasaka, the classic popular girl who pushes others down to feel taller. But Marina's hatred for Shizuka runs deeper than the usual cruelty. We see it when Takopi pretends to be Shizuka to talk to Marina, where Marina's cruelty and the reasons behind it are revealed.
男に寄生して生きてるアバズレの娘が道徳語ってる暇あるならパパを返してよ。マリナちゃん待って。だからその喋り方やめろって。あ、これ無理だ。
Takopi, in that moment blinded by fear and pain, cannot understand the reasons behind Marina's actions. Instead, he starts to instrumentally treat Marina as an obstacle to Shizuka's happiness. Even though his fear makes him hesitate, he keeps trying to fix Shizuka problems, especially those caused by Marina. So far, Takopi appears to be helping Shizuka to improve her life, and in a way, that's true, since his goal is to make her happy, but he doesn't realize he's using Shizuka as a means to his end. All his attempts ignore others' feelings and rights, including Shizuka's. That's why he misses Marina's plan after failing to humiliate her as usual. Marina, full of rage and envy, waits for the exact moment Shizuka walks Shappy to provoke the dog to attack, knowing it will be taken away from Shizuka forever. This finally made Takopi understand what he really had to do. Well, not yet. Here begins the savior arc. Instead of facing the painful process of truly understanding, Takopi escapes the anguish of freedom by hiding behind the fixer role. This is what John Paul Sartre called bad faith, where one hides inside a role to avoid moral responsibility. This leads him through multiple failed attempts to avoid Marina, until he realizes her plan was always to find Shizuka and take away what she loved most. Before we continue the story, I want you to notice how the ability to return to the past actually isolates him from real connection. Every time he fixes something with no consequence, he treats Shizuka's suffering like just another try. We see this when he starts talking to her as if losing Shappy were an everyday event.
そうだっぴ。同じ人間の静香ちゃんに聞いてみるっぴ。マリナちゃんのこと何かわかるかも。静香ちゃん、ちょっと聞きたいんだっぴが。
ザッピー、待って、置いていかないで。
Each fix he makes pulls him further away from people. So when Marina, driven by hatred and pain, attacks again, Takopi, as he always does, tries to fix it. In a moment of fear, confusion, and a strange courage, he ends up killing Marina. That action shatters the camera, and with it the chance to go back in the past. Here's when things become murkier, and yet this is also the start of Takopi's change. Stunned by what he's done, he tries to reflect, but then he's interrupted by Shizuka's disturbing reaction of happiness at seeing Marina dead.
ありがとう、タコピー。殺してくれて。
That unsettles him, though he keeps trying to justify his role for the time being. Then Naoki Asuma appears, a boy who mirrors Takopi in some ways, a child seeking maternal approval because he's constantly compared to his brother. He sees Shizuka as a stand-in for a mother who might finally accept him, and to keep that approval, he'll do things he knows are wrong if wearing the savior mask brings recognition. So Naoki helps conceal Marina's body and to create the plan to travel to Tokyo, hoping Shappy is at Shizuka's father's house. But the heaviest burden ends up on Takopi, because he must replace Marina. He doubts doing this at first, but to keep his role, he accepts it. This coordinates well with his interpretation of what Sartre says. When the moment of saving someone becomes identity, freedom is sold to the role, and whoever lived for the part stops choosing morally. Takopi, at first without remorse, goes to Marina's house and discovers a terrible truth: the hellish environment she lived in.
だからタッセルってなんだよ。
カーテンにつけるの。
人の金でわけわかんねえもん作りやがって、この寄生虫が。
ただい。
キャバクラ通いのあなたはどうなんです？
俺が苦労して稼いだ金何に使おうが勝手だろうが。
ただい。
At first, he ignores it, but after a few days, Marina's mother, seeing the change in his daughter's behavior and even in her language, explodes, slapping Takopi more than once. However, remorse arrives. She knows that the person in front of her is not her daughter, so she begins to realize the deep love she had for her daughter, and at the same time, the atrocious acts committed against her, reaching the disastrous moment where she says to Takopi,
マリナはお腹を痛めて産んだ大切な娘なんです。マリちゃんごめんね。いいママじゃなかったよね。でも大好きだからお願い。帰ってきて。
Takopi finally understands it. Not only took a life, he also broke a connection that the mother and father had with the daughter, a connection that didn't deserve to be taken away. He finally sees Marina's face, a person irreducible, irreplaceable, a person with dignity. But his remorse is already too late.
殺してごめんなさい。
When I say Takopi finally saw Marina's face, I don't mean it literally. I mean Levina's idea of the face. The immediate ethical demand of the other that calls you to respect and dignity, something Takopi had not achieved until that moment. Now more self-aware, he tries to atone and reflect with the others, but shocking news interrupts him. Marina's body has been found, and suspicion falls on Shizuka and those close to her, like Naoki. Naoki, in a moment of despair and anguish, is led to multiple events that end in his mother total disappointment, giving up once and for all the expectations she had toward him, making him manipulable by Shizuka to the point of accepting the evidence of the murder. However, thanks to his brother, he manages to escape that mental prison and finally reflect on his actions, turning in the evidence and consequently exposing Shizuka. When she learns this, has no choice but to flee to Tokyo to see her father, where she suffers the great disappointment of not finding Chappie, and worse.
あの子誰？
それはよくわからないな。
Being rejected by her own father. This moment shatters her sense of humanity completely, driving her toward fantasies of revenge to reclaim her dog. Takopi watches these events and, aware of his actions, tries to get Shizuka to redeem herself. Instead, he witnesses the wildest side of her, which drags up memories he had buried. In the past, he first met a future Marina, who, like Shizuka, had offered him food and company, creating a strange but a solid friendship. But teenage love, jealousy, and family instability led Marina to a tragic end. Marina killed her mother in self-defense, and in a moment of adrenaline, pain, and despair, Marina said,
ごめんなさい。小4の時、ちゃんと殺さなきゃだった。久世静香を。そうすればパパも、直くんだってきっと一緒に。
But she didn't know that an innocent, naive Takopi had overheard that comment, who made the terrible mistake of turning back time to fulfill his savior role by killing someone. Takopi, after regaining his memories, separates from Shizuka and returns to the place where everything began. There he meets Naoki for the last time, who confesses how his actions have harmed him and his family. However, the most noticed fact was the truth Naoki told Takopi, because Takopi, confused by all the good and bad actions that Shizuka, Marina, and even he had done, asks how someone can be good and bad at once, to which Naoki replies,
そりゃそうだろ。そりゃいいとこも悪いとこもあるだろ。そんなこともわからないのか、このタコ。久世さんだってあんまり宿題やってこないし、僕だって僕が一番。
じゃあどうして東くんは。
それでも3人で遊べて楽しかった。生まれて初めてあんな学校が楽しみに思えた。それは友達だったからだ。お前は能天気でバカでゴミだけど優しい。使えないどうしようもない能なしで役立たずの僕にすごいって言ってくれた。バカだから本心だ。それくらいわかる。だからありがとうって言いに来たんだ。
Thanks to Naoki, Takopi understands that the coherence in others' actions and even in his own is what conditions existence itself. In other words, no one is pure. All contradictory actions are the fabric of who we are. This fact makes him abandon his paternalistic attitude and at the same time his fixer role. That's why when he meets Shizuka again still haunted by destructive thoughts, he tries to convince her to stop, but this time not because he wants to fix her, but because he knows now that to help someone you must understand them first. But he also knows he is incapable of understanding Shizuka in that moment, leaving us with this glorious scene.
一体どうすればよかったってお前言ってんだよ。
わかんないっぴ。ごめん静香ちゃん、僕には難しくてわかんないっぴ。ごめんね。 ずかちゃん、何もしてあげられなくてごめんぴ。でもいつも何かしようとしてごめんぴ。しずかちゃんの気持ち僕全然わかんなかったのに。僕いつもお話聞かなくてごめんぴ。何も分かろうとしなくてごめんぴ。しずかちゃん一人にしてごめんぴ。そんなこと言ったってもうパパ戻ってこないじゃん。ピー、ママは私のこともう好きじゃないじゃん。しずかちゃん、じゃあピーも戻らないじゃん。もう全部ダメなんじゃん。しずかちゃん、ごめんね、しずかちゃん。
Finally, Takopi connects with Shizuka, not because he fixed her, but because he took the time to understand the root cause. The main problem wasn't losing Shappy. The main problem wasn't Marina's attacks. The main problem was that they were alone. Alone in abuse. Alone in humiliation. Alone carrying the day after day weight of suffering that made them afraid to share pain. Afraid to listen or be listened to. And look, I'm not criticizing or diagnosing anyone here. This is my reading of the story, because in the end we have to understand that all the characters as Shizuka, Marina, Naoki, and even Takopi are children. Childish, innocent, and above all ignorant of themselves and the world around them. And that very ignorance stops them from making real connections in a conflict-filled world. With that understood, Takopi matures into an authentic resilience, understanding that every experience, even the most tragic, carries within it the seed of connection. With this in mind, he finds his final solution: sacrifice. He powers the camera enough for it to work, but he also uses it so that he disappears, returning to the day that he and Shizuka first met. But Takopi was no longer there. Well, not completely. Takopi had implanted unconscious memories in the three children, with the purpose that, instead of fixing the children, he gave them a starting point to create connection. Connections that guide them on a better path. Connections that allow them to see the other as an ally, not as an enemy. This story can be heavy psychologically for many, but for me, it's phenomenal, and I hope you can see it that way too, because it not only shows human behavior in adults and children, but it also teaches a valuable lesson. You cannot fix anyone, nor be fixed, and that's the point. You don't have the power to fix someone who's emotionally or mentally harmed, not even with tools that go back to the past, but you can give them the chance to be heard. Because at the end of the day, if that person wants to get out of that hole, they will appreciate an attempt to be understood more than an attempt to be fixed.